Okay, so dive in with me here, folks. We're going deep on healing this time around with Pedro Elias. And we're not just talking like bandages and cough syrup here, right? You sent over this webinar, and wow, this guy's like a Portuguese mystic, a writer. You even mentioned there were retreats based on his stuff.
And it sounds like you picked up on something right away just from that webinar, that contemplative vibe.
Yeah, Elias is really big on silence,
Oh.
but it's more than just like a meditation thing for him.
Oh.
It actually plays a key role in how he views this whole process of what true healing really is.
Hold on, I'm intrigued. But before we get too far into it, let's unpack how he even defines healing, because I know he makes a really interesting distinction between therapy and what he calls true healing. Right. He uses this example early on of someone stuck in a cycle of like trauma response. And he says therapy in that case would be like removing a roadblock, which is super helpful in the moment. But true healing, he argues that true healing changes you so fundamentally that that same roadblock wouldn't even trip you up again.
Okay, now that's a powerful image. So it's not just about fixing the problem, it's about, like, becoming different somehow.
Exactly. He's talking about a total transformation, a complete shift in how you operate in the world. Like imagine someone who always takes criticism super personally, maybe because of something that happened in their childhood. Therapy might help them manage that reaction when it comes up in the moment. But true healing, Elias argues, would address the root cause, the way they internalize those early experiences. It would allow them to receive feedback without automatically spiraling back to that old hurt.
So it's like therapy helps you manage the symptoms, but true healing addresses the underlying condition.
Spot on. And that's where this idea of the soul as a tuning fork comes into play.
Okay.
Elias believes our souls are constantly guiding us back to our intended path, and path, he argues, that was actually set before we were even born.
Whoa, okay. I knew we were going deep, but predetermined paths. What does that even mean for free will? If we're already on a set course, how can we change anything?
That's the paradox, isn't it? And Elias believes that we do have free will. It's just that, he says, the choices we make can lead us away from our soul's purpose.
Okay.
And that's where karma comes in. And not in like a punitive way.
Right.
Think of it more like a cosmic GPS. Even when you take a detour, it reroutes you, helps you learn and grow along the way.
So less about punishment, more like course correction.
Exactly. And that course correction can happen in a couple of ways. Elias outlines two paths of what he calls ego evolution, horizontal and vertical.
Okay.
Imagine the horizontal path like refining raw materials.
Okay.
It's messy, it's challenging, but through those struggles, through the experiences that shape us, our egos are molded into something more refined, something capable of containing the soul's light.
So it's not like we're born with this perfectly formed container for our souls.
Ah.
We actually have to build it.
Precisely. And those raw materials, think about heartbreak. They're the fire that forges us into something stronger, something more resilient. And as we move through those experiences, we create this chalice, so to speak, that's ready to receive the full force of our soul's energy.
So what happens when that chalice is ready? That's where the vertical path comes in, right?
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. The vertical path begins when the soul can fully descend into the prepared ego. Elias describes this as a kind of spiritual alchemy, where the combination of the soul's energy and the refined ego creates something he calls spiritual gold.
Spiritual gold. Okay, now you've got my attention. What is that exactly?
Well, Elias describes it as the essence of love itself. And this isn't just some sentimental notion. He believes the spiritual gold is incredibly powerful, something that even, and this is where it gets really wild, something that even God needs.
God needs something. No, that's a new one for me. I always thought it was the other way around, that we were the ones in need.
Right. It's a real mind bender. But Elias is proposing something kind of radical here, that maybe the whole point of our existence isn't about us, like, ascending to God, but about us bringing something totally new to creation, something God can't create on its own.
And that something is this spiritual gold.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're not just here for the enlightenment buffet. We're actually supposed to be contributing something back to the universe. That's a pretty big responsibility.
It is, and what's really interesting is how Elias connects this idea to duality, to the very nature of human experience. He uses the Anunnaki myth as an example, you know, those ancient astronaut beings who supposedly came to Earth looking for gold.
Yeah, I've always been kind of fascinated by those stories.
Me too. But what Elias points out is, think about it. If a civilization was advanced enough to travel through space, they probably wouldn't need to enslave humans to mine physical gold.
Yeah, they'd have tech for that.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So what were they really after then? What was the real treasure?
Well, Elias believes that this whole thing with the Anunnaki needing gold is actually an allegory, a symbolic representation of something much deeper. He suggests that what they were truly seeking was the spiritual gold, the kind that can only be generated through the complexities of human experience, our struggles, our joys, our capacity for love in the face of suffering?
So it's not about the literal gold, but what it represents, this essence that we cultivate as humans.
Mhm.
But hold on. Not everyone is at that point of generating spiritual gold, are they? I mean, we talked about building that inner chalice, and that doesn't happen overnight.
Hmm.
What about those of us who are, well, still kind of in the messy middle of things? What role do healers play in all of this?
Excellent question. Elias believes that true healers act as mirrors. They're reflecting our own soul's light back to us. They help us see our potential, our own innate capacity for healing and transformation, even when we can't see it ourselves.
So it's less about the healer fixing us and more about them helping us tap into our own inner healer.
Exactly. He actually emphasizes the importance of a healer's neutrality. They're not there to impose their will or their beliefs. They're just there to hold space for us, to connect with our own inner wisdom.
It's like if the healer is too caught up in their own agenda. It's like trying to see yourself in a funhouse mirror,
Mhm.
right? You're not getting a clear reflection. But Elias also talks about those unexpected moments of healing, those times when we find guidance or support from the most unlikely sources.
Yes. He says that healing can come from a kind word from a stranger, a moment of awe in nature, even stumbling upon a book at just the right time.
Like the book that set Elias on his own path. It's fascinating how he describes being drawn to it, even though his mind initially resisted the message. It's like his soul knew what he needed, even if he wasn't consciously aware of it yet. It makes you wonder what else is out there guiding us, even when we're not looking for it.
That's the power of the soul, isn't it? It operates on a different frequency than our rational minds.
hmm
And as we deepen our connection with it, we become more attuned to its guidance, even if it comes in unexpected ways.
Which brings us back to that silence Elias keeps emphasizing. How does that fit into all of this?
He believes silence is the key to tuning into that soul frequency. It's in those moments of stillness, when the mental chatter quiets down, that we can begin to hear our own inner wisdom, our own internal guidance system.
So it's like hitting the mute button on all the external noise so we can finally hear our own inner music. But he also talks about this sense of loneliness that can come with spiritual awakening, which seems to contradict the idea that we're all connected.
You're right, it's a common paradox. One of the webinar participants, Jelly, she brings up this very point. She talks about feeling isolated as she starts to awaken to her spiritual path because the people around her aren't necessarily having the same experiences.
Yeah, I can only imagine how isolating that must feel.
Yeah.
It's like you're suddenly speaking a different language. You want to share what you're seeing and feeling, but how do you explain it to someone who hasn't had those same experiences?
Exactly. And Elias doesn't shy away from that. He acknowledges how challenging it can be to find your tribe, so to speak.
Yeah,
He even shares his own experience after his mystical experience, this profound sense of connection he felt, realizing that we are all connected on a soul level. But he also offers some really wise advice. Sometimes we don't need to share everything we experience.
there's a certain sacredness to that, isn't there? Not every realization needs to be announced. Sometimes it's about honoring the deeply personal nature of the journey.
Absolutely. And as Elias points out, some experiences are meant for our own personal growth. Sharing them prematurely might not be beneficial, either for us or for the people we're sharing with. It's about discernment, recognizing when to speak up and when to hold those insights close to our hearts.
So how do we navigate those moments when we do feel alone on the path? It's one thing to intellectually understand that we're all connected, but it's another to actually feel that connection in our day-to-day lives, especially when we're surrounded by people who might not get it.
That's where Elias circles back to the importance of aligning with our soul's purpose, of walking that shorter, divinely ordained path. He suggests that as we deepen our connection with our own soul, we naturally attract others who are on a similar wavelength. It's not about seeking external validation, but about becoming a beacon for our tribe, letting our own light shine so brightly that it draws them in.
It's like that saying, right? Your vibe attracts your tribe.
Yeah.
But it's not just about finding people who get us, is it? It's about what we bring to the world,
Mhm.
what we contribute. And that brings us back to this idea of spiritual gold that Elias talks
Yeah,
about.
yes, exactly. He ends the webinar with this really powerful message. Our journey isn't about escaping the world, it's about adding something to it.
Yeah.
And what we add, what the world desperately needs, is that spiritual gold, that love that's forged in the fires of our experiences.
It's beautiful, really.
Huh.
It's like he's saying that our own healing, our own struggles and transformations, they can actually make the world a better place.
That's the alchemy of it all, right? Our own individual journeys, as messy and challenging as they can be, they have this ripple effect, this power to create something so much larger than ourselves. It actually reminds me of that Rumi quote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." It's in those places where we feel broken, where we've experienced pain or loss, that we have the potential to radiate the most light.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I have to ask, what does this all mean for you? You know our listener. Because it's one thing to listen to us unpack Elias's ideas, but the real magic happens when we start to embody them. Where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, Elias would probably say, start with silence.
Yeah.
Carve out some space in your day, even if it's just for a few minutes, to simply be present with yourself, quiet the mind, tune into that internal guidance system, and see what comes up. What whispers of wisdom are you hearing?
See if you can sense that tuning fork inside, gently guiding you back to your path. And who knows? You might just find that the most profound journeys, they're not about traveling to some distant land, but about diving deep into the unexplored territories within ourselves.